Welcome, everyone, to the first panel of Multichain Day. We're going to get started, and I think we should start with introductions so you get to know each of us a little bit better. I'm happy to go first. My name is Guy Willett. I'm an investor at A16Z Crypto, and I'm going to ask everyone to give you their name and what they're doing to make the world a little bit more multi-chain. And so I have the most boring answer, which is I'm investing in projects that are going in that direction. But there are four much more interesting answers, and so Abi, maybe you'll start us off.
Sweet. Yeah, GM everyone. My name is Abby. I'm the product and API lead at Zerion. And what I do is two things for Zerion that help us move closer to, multi-chain world. One, we built the Zerion wallet. And as you all know, there's a ton of wallets in the space, but we started out as a portfolio tracker back in the day, trying to simplify, what does UX look like across chains. But more recently, we launched our own wallet last year. And more recently, we launched our own network. So it's a layer 2 called Zero Network, really for helping you abstract away gas fees. But on the other hand, I also work on the API. So we power other wallets as well. So we help, wallets like Uniswap, Rainbow, and a lot more dApps in the space power, the transaction and portfolio data. So kind of seen on both sides of the spectrum what multi-chain user experiences look like.
Nice. Thank you. I'm Daniel from Gashawk. And at Gashawk, we are focusing on not only making transactions cheaper for the users, but for making the interaction with blockchain in general more safe, efficient, and secure. And we are continuing building out features in that regard. So looking forward to that speech.
GM everyone, I'm Ivo from Ambire Wallet. And Ambire Wallet is a wallet that makes self-custody easy and secure for everyone in the EVM ecosystem. And you can clearly see how this relates to multi-chain and solving the chain fragmentation problem. And we've been working for the last couple of years on solving so many UX issues, but obviously one of the main ones was this. And the way we're solving it right now, or setting the stage for it to get solved, is by something we call hybrid account abstraction, which brings the best from EOAs and smart accounts. And we believe that this can help solve chain fragmentation because it gives us an account type that has the same address on each chain, is completely interoperable, and allows locking funds, which will enable great ability to have a cross-chain account model.
Cool. And I'm Noam from Alchemy, working on enabling developers to build systems that hide away infrastructure from their end users using their applications. So a lot of that is transitioning users to some next generation systems on the EVM. So smart accounts and account abstraction, rollups were mentioned a lot, and then providing them the tools and infrastructure to leverage these primitives to build killer applications and abstract away the blockchain from their end users.
So I'd love to start with chain abstraction, because a lot of what multi-chain has come to mean is the idea that you wouldn't know perhaps what chain you're interacting with, and it would be well abstracted. And perhaps we can come back around the horn. I can start with you, Noam, because you said, I think, abstract or abstraction 4 times in your intro. So tell me what chain abstraction means to you and what some of the big challenges that you're solving there are today.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I do use that word too much. To me, we were talking before this panel about comparing everything to Web2 analogies. So my Web2 analogy for this is in the same way that when I use an email, I don't really care where my email server is located or what database engine it's running. When I use blockchain applications, value needs to accrue to the application. I want to use the application because it's valuable to me as the end user. And I don't really care what underlying technological choices developers make under the scenes to support the application. So whether it's Optimism or Arbitrum, or whether I'm accessing it through an Alchemy or an Infura, doesn't really matter. I just want to be able to use that application. And so to me, chain abstraction is the decoupling of the infrastructure layer and the application layer. Value needs to accrue to the application layer. Developers need to build applications that provide value to end users, and those end users shouldn't have to care about any of the technological choices to support that.
Ivo, what do you think is the biggest challenge for chain abstraction today?
So first of all, we can divide chain abstraction in 2 separate problems, right? The view problem and then I call it the action problem. And the view problem has been already solved. There are fantastic wallets out there that show you one portfolio view of all the assets you have across all chains. Obviously, Zerion was also one of the first, Ambire, and many, many others. So the view problem is really easy to solve, but the action problem is much, much, much tougher to solve. And the action problem to give you a brief example, imagine you have 100 USDC on Ethereum and then 50 USDC on Polygon, but you want to send someone 110 on Ethereum, right? So at this point in time, you, from a user perspective, from a Web2 point of view, should be able to use all your 150. But then you have to explain to the user that, wait, you cannot use 150, you can only use 100 on Ethereum and potentially bridge 10. The user obviously doesn't want to care about this and cannot be bothered to do all of this. So obviously that's the toughest thing to solve. And one of the main ways that it's getting solved is intents, which is when you think of transactions, you think of it as I, the user, am authorizing a certain piece of code to get executed. That's a transaction, right? But an intent is I, the user, am authorizing a certain thing to get done for me. So then anyone on the network can go and find a way to solve this. And in this particular example, the way to solve this would be get 100 USDC of the balance from the Ethereum balance and then find a way to bridge the other 10 in order for the user to be able to use 110. So yeah, I would say that this is the toughest issue because to make intents work, you have to flip everything upside down, basically, in Web3 infrastructure.
Daniel, give us your perspective on chain abstraction here.
I totally agree with the two that already answered it. I also agree with the separation of the problems. There's the view problem, and to say it is solved, I think technically you're right, but how is the wallet problem being used, or how are the wallets currently used? So many people are still using wallets that are not as good in this respect, and how can we convince users to actually use better solutions that really abstract it, so that my mother is not asking me if I'm working at Bitcoin, but she can simply use it as a layer, as an abstracted layer that actually gets her intent done, and not she has to worry about where the funds are, which chains are now going to interoperate in order to make her wish come true. So I think it's that kind of problem, to make it easy, to make it attractive, and to not have the users worry at all about what's going to happen. So it must be very, very tightly integrated, and I see the solution only there.
Yeah, well, they made my job a lot easier. I agree, especially with what you said about defining chain abstraction. But I honestly want to take a step back and even say that there's multiple audiences in the space who define chain abstraction differently. And if you take another step back, it is a VC buzzword for a broad set of tools and a broad set of projects, interop projects, frameworks, standards, trying to solve a goal, which is really to simplify UX, right? So if you think of the interop projects, their goal is to be able to make it easier to fetch or call data from one to another. If you think of the end user, it's really what you said from Empire and wallets perspectives to be able to track your assets across multiple chains. And then for standards like Cake or some of the other frameworks, they have their own problems to solve. So for us, I really think that where we are right now, the biggest unlock for chain abstraction is the UX for the end user. Because now you're going to go from what you said on, being able to onboard your mom to crypto, them being able to track their NFTs, their assets across multiple chains. But if you take it one step further, we still didn't really solve account abstraction. We didn't solve gas abstraction. I think we can bake in a lot of terms into this, but for us, one of our goals for the next 6 months is to really solve, for gas. We think that that's one of the biggest barriers to onboarding users. So that's one of the reasons we're also launching the network. So yeah, I would really say it's important when we talk about chain abstraction to define what specific part of the audience we're representing. Because as a user, I think that's where the most, they have the most unlock in value, versus a lot of these interop projects will probably not even exist, in a few years from now, because they're really competing, for the same piece of the market there.
So this gets to an issue that I think is really interesting to discuss, perhaps the tension or lack of tension between user experience and developer experience. And on this panel, we have people who are both, building consumer products and developer tooling, or one or the other. And I would love each of your perspectives on how you think about that tension or the complementary nature of trying to serve both developers and users.
I can start with some similarities in that I think it's a bit of a power law on getting to 80% of the user experience is easy, but like the further you want to iterate, the harder it is. And that's true for developer experience and user experience. And like all the user experiences you guys are familiar with today, both in crypto and not, the ones that feel really, really, really magical and really simple, like the more simple they are, the more thought people put into them and the harder they were to put together in practice. And so I think we're kind of seeing some of these things play out now in crypto where we have some nice properties like smart accounts exist, rollups exist. There are step functions that have landed that have made the user experience better, but there's still a long tail to iterate on, and that's going to be a lot of work for the coming years.
I might have a hot take here. I think there is absolutely no friction between developer experience and user experience, but I think they're massively interconnected. And obviously, we all know in crypto that UX sucks. But to give you a quick anecdote, which also somewhat relates to chain abstraction, I've seen people who I've onboarded onto Ambire think that they can double spend. Because, like, for example, you send someone money and it's not immediately reflected in the dashboard, right? Which is standard in Web3 UX. And then they think they can double spend and cheat the system, which is funny. But then at the same time, I've onboarded many developers who are absolutely experienced developers from Web2. I've onboarded them on Web3, and they were super confused, for example, by the fact that at least 2 or 3 years ago, they didn't have clear error messages when something blows up in Solidity code. They just get transaction reverted. Or even when error messages became a thing, there was still not super intuitive. You just get a string and you don't know where it blew up exactly. Tenderly did a lot to solve this, but in general, it's not something you get out of the box when you start being a Web3 developer. And when you look at the Web3 dev experience, when you truly try to abstract yourself from other things, sorry for using the word abstraction, and you look at the developer experience on its own, it's so much worse than something you have in Web2. And I think that a big part of why Web3 UX for end users is lacking is because we as developers, we have to battle with so much issues that at the end of the day, we don't have enough time to focus on the product. So just getting something off the ground and getting something working is so difficult. And anyone, again, who's worked in account abstraction, and I'm sure that Alchemy can also speak a bit about that because they've done a lot of like SDKs and frameworks and etc. But my point is, anyone who has ever tried to build something in account abstraction knows how difficult it is to even get it off the ground. And that's after 4.3.3.7, which improved things massively. So just getting a product out of the door is so difficult that we don't have enough time to focus on the end user UX. So that's why I think they're super intertwined.
Yeah, the last point you mentioned is actually very interesting. I think that a wallet that interacts with the network in particular has only a limited set of instructions to actually do something, especially when you're operating an EOA instead of a smart account or a smart contract-based wallet. So I would really like to see a more sophisticated interface to the network itself for the backend of the wallets, so that you can more easily handle private mempool interactions, for instance, or that you can more easily handle custom functions that a particular RPC is offering, in contrast to the general interface of an Ethereum node. So when we would standardize these aspects, I think we would get new tools that would make this building experience or this developer experience much better, much easier, and we would get better products in the end.
Yeah, I would say it's still too early to say, but I have the feeling that at least in the last cycle or so, there's been a lot more emphasis on like infra and B2B tools for crypto that like my hot take is that developer experience in general has probably grown a little bit faster than user experiences. There's just not that much effort and as much, I guess, like just like innovation and attention being put into like the end user experiences for consumer apps. You know, even for chain abstraction, if I go more specifically, yeah, we're super early. There's Near, came up with the term. There's like Particle, there's like Alchemy. There's really only a couple of providers that even have some level of tooling. Like we're working with ZK Sync for our stack, and a lot of it is being built out, and they announce things first, and then they think about how we build the stack let's get the documentation out. And that's the same across like pretty much every, stack provider. So I'd say like developer experience has probably become a lot better. And, think about like before Alchemy existed, it was the norm that you'd actually like self-host your own node, or like, you'd like never want to like, oh, decentralization is the way. Like you'd never want to centralize your node to like a provider. So I think in the same way, like we actually have to appreciate how far developer experience has come. Like the barriers to entry have honestly gone down so much that like it's easier probably to onboard like a Web2 developer than to onboard like someone who's totally new to crypto to like understand and transact and like actually get using applications. Maybe Base is one of the only chains where I can see actual user experience being a lot easier to comprehend. So yeah, I'd say like probably DevX has grown a little faster than user experience.
So this is maybe an obvious question, but you have all answered why multi-chain makes a lot of sense for developers. But from the user perspective or the user experience perspective, and you were alluding to this, Abhi, so I'll start with you. What about multi-chain makes for a better user experience and you think will convince more people to use crypto products as opposed to not moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, so there's two premises here, right? Like one premise is that we will have a Cambrian explosion of chains. There's no denying that.
Why?
And why? The incentives are just so that like every stack provider, every like even like founder wants to build a chain inevitably to solve some sort of problem they have. The problem could be as specific as an app chain would solve, or it could be as general as like a general, rollup. But like it's just like a no-brainer. And also for monetization, right? Like you could monetize off sequencer fees. Sure, you need to have usage, but like I think it's getting to a point where similar to how everyone was launching a governance token last cycle. And when you ask why, everyone's just like, it makes sense. But now maybe it doesn't. I think we're at that point where you need to have this cycle where, some chains would stand the test of like having distribution, having, users actually build meaningful dApps, like developers building meaningful dApps. So I think like that's inevitable. So that's one premise. And in terms of like why users would then have a problem of like tracking assets across multiple chains, like me, myself, I have like several wallets and I don't even know where my USDC is sitting. Or if I want to use Polygon for whatever reason and I don't have, Matic or some gas token, it's harder to on-ramp than to ask a friend to like, shield me some Matic. So I think there's several problems on the user experience side where, imagine you could have, gas that lives maybe on one chain, say the Zero network, but will immediately be able to like, give you liquidity for gas on any other network. That's a hypothetical scenario, right? Like that would make user experience so much easier such that you'd be able to like, start testing dApps on even a chain that you've not onboarded to before.
It's not hypothetical. Sorry for interrupting. It's not hypothetical. We do it. It's called a gas tank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So exactly that exists, but like it's not the norm in every wallet or every like dApp out there. So I think like that's really the massive unlock. The unlock is that you have all of these chains, and I think users should absolutely know what chain they're on or what chain their assets live in. That's kind of not what we're trying to solve for, right? What we're trying to solve for is like, where these exist, but it's super easy to find these assets. It's never like it's never a sort of like a hindrance for you to like just perform an action without having to go through KYC to on-ramp or, do whatever. So I think that's where really the unlock exists, being able to like, go to a different network. It's almost like this analogy of like, hey, you could take your sword from one game to another, but that never happened. But I think in this case, you could actually take your assets from one, ecosystem to another a lot easier.
So I actually think that it's really simple to explain why we need the multi-chain future, and it all boils down to scalability, the favorite word of the Ethereum community from like 5 years ago, when Ethereum itself was trying to solve scalability. But now at this point, we already know that the future is rollups. We already know that they can solve scalability. And as soon as you have a theoretical future where the user might have assets on 3 chains, you might as well have 30. Right? So if you have to solve the problem for 3 chains, you can also solve the problem for 30 chains. And this by itself, if we solve this problem, then it unlocks the true scalability that will allow real adoption. Because we think that we have the chicken and egg problem with the scalability and the adoption. I personally think that the bottleneck is mainly UX, and it's not so much that we don't have the scalability, but then you can make the argument that this UX does depend on scalability, right? Because you either have to use Ethereum, which is expensive, or you have to use a rollup which requires bridging and requires extra steps and requires fragmentation. So yeah, I think that's why we need to solve the chain abstraction problem. But yeah, in regards to the gas, being able to spend it cross-chain, this is something that we already solved, and a few other teams already did as well. Like for example, Avocado, I think you guys do this as well, if I'm not mistaken. But basically the whole point is that you can top up funds on one chain and then use them across every single rollup, even rollups that you didn't know existed. So even rollups that didn't exist until yesterday, you can still use the gas tank there and just pay the fees from this gas tank that you already topped up in any ERC20.
We're all in the builder seat here, Guy. I'm curious for you as an investor what multi-chain means for you. I know you're moderating, so sorry to throw you under the bus, but kind of what you look for in where you see things playing out here.
Well, I think some of what Abi alluded to is correct about incentives for monetization. And then I would very much agree with your point, Ivo, on scalability. And I think it's perhaps not as simple as, well, if you can solve it for 3 chains, you can solve it for 30 or 300 or 3,000. But I do think it is correct to say that the most viable long-term roadmap for scaling is with many different rollups on top of Ethereum or perhaps other chains. And then it necessitates that most of the solutions you're building are much more well established. I think there's a larger open question about what the ultimate UX looks like, and I know there are a bunch of different opinions on this panel as to whether perhaps you are aware of the chain that you're using as an end user, or perhaps you're not, and that's entirely abstracted. And so I think a good question to move to is perhaps what is the final user experience of crypto? Does it look like a Web2 product today? Does it look a little bit like a really nice wallet? I'd love each of your opinions and perhaps to get a sense for where you agree and where you disagree.
We observe a kind of a convergence in user experience in mobile apps. When you operate your Trade Republic, when you operate your whatever banking app or something, it is all looking very similar to me, at least, and it is very easy. And they also abstract a complicated technical solution in the end. It's slower, it's custodial, it's not. I'm not being my own bank in this, but we can abstract this. And I think those apps will look very similar and should look very similar and should be similarly easy to be used. We have the bonus that we can offer users their own power and give that back to them and be their own bank and be the ones in control and be censorship resistant and offer that especially to the lesser developed countries compared with the modern Western world. So it was a blast to see all those people from South America when we hit the DEF CON at Bogota, and the energy they put into that to solve the local problems they actually have with their money systems, with their governance. So that's exciting for me. And I think it should look as easy as the current convergence of Web2-based app.
So I think it should look like traditional fintech, like Revolut, like Robinhood. But obviously, for us to get like real adoption, we need to have something which is like 5x better or 10x better than the existing system. So what are we offering? It could be something like no KYC, don't kill me, or it could be. What could it be? It could be like a single identity, which I think is really sexy in that aspect, and I think that's something that's sort of a killer feature of Web3, like having decentralized identity that only you own, like sign in with Google, but you're owning it and not Google. So I think that it is basically what the ideal vision is basically something that already exists in Silicon Valley, but we need that 5x or 10x improvement on top of that to figure it out.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Especially for wallets, I think like when we started out as well, we didn't have any references for how you build, a portfolio tracker. And then it was more skeuomorphic in design. Like what do you have currently in other fields? Like there was SoFi, there was personal capital that you use for your personal assets, right? So it was very similar, kind of like piggybacking off of existing solutions, but trying to make it like much more user friendly. So like you have gas immediately visible, or you have, Connect wallet, and it's just overall more minimalist in design. But now I think I like the trend of where we're going, where if you branch out beyond wallets, you have PWAs that are becoming a lot more popular. I personally use a lot of these on base. Like, think at FarCon last month, we had this, pickleball tournament where we used this app called Bracket, and it's just like a simple way to like bet on, who's going to win a tournament, bridging your degen on base, and all you needed is like a PWA, so it's a link, and you just add that to your home screen, and it's an app, right? So like I think I like where that design space is going. So it's really interesting how people are experimenting rapidly, and like the overall costs to like go to market is a lot easier. You don't need to wait for an Apple review, or there's no like, blocker really to like ship something in a day. So that's great. And for desktop, I think, yeah, we're pretty much like still kind of like split 50-50. A lot more users are open to using, Web3 on mobile. But when you think about some of the feedback we've got, people's perception of trust, security, safety, they just prefer somehow to use more apps on their desktop as well. So I think we should still not like leave that behind when building, functional UX. So ideally for us and for a lot of teams, it's looked very cross-platform.
Do you agree with this consensus, Noam? Where is the key stored? What does the UX look like from your perspective?
I feel like that's the $1 million question, right? I don't really know.
Tell us.
Yeah, I mean,
Question.
there's very little application level product market fit in crypto right now. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone. Like you can point to stablecoins as one. I think like we're seeing Polymarket take off, we're seeing Farcaster take off, but there's not too many things you could point to, and almost none of them are UX or scale constrained right now. I think the current systems in place get them pretty far. Like the biggest application in crypto right now is probably the WorldCoin protocol, and we're working with them on the roll up, but like scale is not the main constraint right now. And so I'm not super sure what the barriers to entry are still. I don't really know what the end UX will look like. I think it would behoove us to look at the decades and decades of research from Web2 user experience researchers. I think we tend to like constrain ourselves to a silo and reinvent a lot of terms and reinvent a lot of wheels. But my sense is like somewhat in line with this panel. It'll look Web2-esque, but to the details, I can't speak too much right now. I think it'll be helpful to see more applications that actually provide value to users that they want to use, not just to like gamble or speculate on, but because they get value through, and like use those applications to drive the feedback on what that UX needs to look like.
So it feels like we have a good sense of the problems and the challenges and hopefully of the end game. But I'd love to ask each of you as the final question, what single change you think would be the most impactful to move us towards that end game? If you had a magic wand and could form perfect agreement on some standard, or launch a product, or have some meaningful change, what single thing do you think would be most impactful towards realizing a multi-chain future with great UX? I'll start with you, Abi.
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased, but I just say like, at least for us within the EVM space, we've tried to like ensure we support every chain, whether it's through a custom network, testnet, or through just like a native support. So that would be being able to like basically not have any constraint to interact with multiple chains. And I wish for every wallet in the space, so like at least consolidate that as like a base feature. That would make my user experience a lot better, because I don't use just Zerion. I use like 20 different wallets, including some of those, who are in the room right now. So I think it's an end goal that would make us at least, start from like a base level that's pretty uniform.
Yeah, adding to this, I would definitely, if I had that wand, I would say we need more real world use, like usage, and my crypto portfolio should be usable in the real world. And there are some initiatives, some products out there that are starting to do that. Shout out to the Monerium team, shout out to Gnosis Pay. But we need more of this. We need to have the people and to make these layers much, much thinner. It must be easier to actually benefit from what we have on crypto.
So I'm extremely biased, but I can defend this take pretty hard, and that's that we need EAP 7702, which allows essentially to put it simply, turning EOAs into smart accounts. And the reason for this is that I believe account abstraction helps solve a lot of these UX issues, chain abstraction issues, and etc. that are currently a bottleneck. Because when you look at who's entering crypto, when you look at retail goes directly to centralized exchanges. And the reason is they're so much easier to use than self-custodial wallets at the moment. So account abstraction and chain abstraction are the way forward. And the best way to make this happen is 7702. The reason for that is that we found over 2 years of pushing our product that the biggest blocker is people not willing to migrate their accounts. They're not willing, first of all, asking them to trust a new wallet is quite hard. But when you add on top of this, having to move all of your funds to a new address, then it gets near impossible. So yeah.
Yeah, also very excited for 7702 coming to Ethereum soon. But I guess beyond that, one observation we have from just years at Alchemy is there's it takes a while to get to the right idea, and that might be 7702. And then it takes a long time to build the right developer experience around that idea. And so all the tooling that needs to exist, probably support that and make it easy to integrate in applications. And then from there, it takes a while to get to the user experience. You need to actually make it easy to use for end users. So figuring out how to tighten that feedback loop between idea and production grade developer experience and production grade user experience will help us move faster here. And I think we have most of the right ideas in place to get to a global scale Ethereum. Some of the ones that I've been paying the most attention to recently are interoperability between rollups and how do you provide atomic cross-chain transactions and take all these rollups and form them into kind of a superstructure that you can use to aggregate assets across. I think there's a lot of good ideas there. I think it's going to take a while for those ideas to calcify, and then a lot longer for teams to be able to build developer experiences on top of those ideas. And so I think we'll only be seeing enterprise grade, practical end user experiences on top of these kinds of ideas in quite a while.
Well, that's an optimistic and exciting future to end on. Please join me in thanking our panelists.